Hello, if you're watching live, this is my monthly Paro seminar. I used to do these behind the Patreon paywall, and more recently I do this free every month on my YouTube channel. And then we have a processing room that's available to everybody on my Patreon that happens afterwards. So that's 11:30 Pacific summertime and 7:30 British summertime, and then you can work it all out from there. I'm just wanting to kind of do more stuff that's freely available, but also I really appreciate your support on Patreon. For those of you who are paying, thank you. That is how I make a living. And I know it's been tough for so many people in the last few years in terms of having disposable income or any income at all. So I really appreciate your support. It's been difficult as well, more so for me as well. Not more so as in more than you, less so because I've been able to have savings that I've got, so I'm okay. But I moved back to Ireland because it's cheaper here. I got a lovely apartment, but at half the price of what I was paying for an 800 square foot apartment in LA. But there is a little part of me that would like to move back to LA later this year and start some live events there. And so your support on Patreon will help me to do that. I need to up my Patreon a little bit to be able to, do that. So if you're interested in this material, you want to be part of it, please check it out. There's loads of stuff. There's film groups, there's hangouts, there's courses I run, there's seminars, lots of stuff. But yes, I also do lots of free stuff, mostly free, because I want to make this stuff accessible to everybody. So I have a podcast. We don't podcast that much at the moment, but we do the odd one. And also I have an archives podcast where I just put up talks, so you can find that as well online. And I've got this YouTube channel, so plenty out there. I want to tell you a little bit about 3 things that are coming up this year that are bigger things. One is Wake. Wake is a festival that I've been running for the last 10 years, and this is going to be the 10th Wake, actually the 10th live Wake this year, and that's happening on the 2nd of June. I almost didn't do it. Since COVID, everything became very patchy, and I was running Wake maybe once every 2 years. And this year I just thought, it's time to just let it go. And then some of you said, no, you should do it, and really encouraged me to. And I listen, obviously, and I went, okay, let's do it. So I put it on sale a lot later than usual, and so it's going to be a lot smaller. There's got 30 of us, and the idea initially, because there was going to be about 30 of us, was to have something very chill. We just hang out for 5 days, have conversations, local music, local bars, that kind of stuff. But I've got an amazing lineup. There lots of people said, listen, I would like to come, I would like to speak. So we have Elliot, my podcast partner. He's coming over from America. We're going to do live podcast. He's going to do a 1-hour special, which we're going to record. This will be the debut, the first time it's out there. He might come with Grace Helbig, who's a big YouTube star, comedian, actress, so she might be there, but not 100%. We have Helen Barry, we have Alfie Bowen, and we have like local musicians as well, like Teresa Livingston and Duke Special. We have this incredible lineup, but still it's going to be more intimate. The opening party will be at my place. We'll be hanging out in some local venues, and it'll be less kind of led from the front. There'll be lots of front stuff, but that will be more to open up interesting conversations around the themes of Paro theology, in particular this idea of Church of the Contradiction, what it means to create a communion, a group, a gathering where we are able to embrace the doubt, unknowing and complexity of life, and we're able to cultivate a curiosity with our own unconscious, where we're able to experience a radical grace. And by grace I mean the opposite of self-help, where in self-help you move from one place to another. In grace, where you are able to, you don't have to do anything, but in not doing anything and radically accepting yourself and experiencing that acceptance from others, you're able to see your own struggles, your own divisions, your own symptoms. You're able to listen to those. You're able to begin to unpick them. And then ironically, you are able to transform and change precisely in the experience of not needing to change at all. So Wake is an experiment in a communion of grace. But also the theme of this year is, how do we bring that communion of grace to the places where we live? And whether we introduce or we help to deepen groups that we already have to these ideas, and introduce these ideas, or we create something new. That's kind of the theme, broadly speaking. So if you're interested in that, it's the 2nd of June, so it's like 4 weeks away. Flights seem to be very good value at the moment for some reason, so it might be a good time to come along to Wake. And I can never promise that it will happen again. It's been very rocky since COVID. I would like to continue to do it, but I don't want to guarantee that. Next up as well, I just want to tell you about the leadership retreat that I'm doing in October. That's in the Crawfordsburn Inn. That's for any of you who are leaders or want to be leaders in churches or other groups that are attempting to cultivate these communions of grace. And we'll be looking at how to strategize to create healthy versions of that wherever you are, and we're doing that in an incredible place with a beautiful spa. So I'm encouraging people to bring their partners and to see it as a holiday as well as a place to strategize and to move forward with your groups and congregations. And then finally, Spark. Spark is for anybody who really wants to experience 5 days of this. Whereas Wake is more theoretical, and there's lots of philosophy and ideas, and it's a lot more kinetic in the city of Belfast, and we go to different venues and do different things. Spark is much more relaxed. It takes place in this beautiful luxury hotel, same place as the leadership retreat. It's got a beautiful spa overlooking this incredible forest. It's where C.S. Lewis spent a lot of his time, where he had his engagement with Joy Davidson, where he was inspired to create Narnia, which is inspired by the forest that you would be staying at. So if you're interested in 5 days with me and in a place where you can begin to listen to yourself, that's what it's about. There's certain things that you can do through meditation or kind of other kind of things where you do it on your own, where you do something on your own and you reflect. But there's some things where you need a screen in which you project out something that you can't see in yourself, and then it is shone back to you. So through the other, you begin to see a dimension of yourself that you hadn't seen before, that ironically is so obvious that when you see it, you can't believe you didn't see it. And Spark is really a place for that. It's a space where you will encounter some dimension of yourself that is invisible to you, but is on the surface. And by confronting that, transformation can occur. So those are the 3 big things that I'm doing this year, and if you're interested in any of them, fire onto my website, you'll find out more. And as I say, hopefully I will potentially be back in America, either living or just coming back for some visits later in the year. I'm actually planning to go out to LA again in July, maybe for 4 weeks, and I would like to do 4 events while I'm there. So that's the plan. Now, if you're watching live, feel free to say hello. There's a few people I can see. There's Tim and Greg and Leah, who I met in LA a few weeks ago. It was good to see you, and good to see you online. And Emily, sorry, the computer's quite far away, so I'm kind of like slightly blurred, but I think I can see those names. So hopefully, I'm reading the comments in case somebody's saying we can't hear you or something like that, but it seems like everything's working. Okay, so what I want to do in this seminar is, well, this connects actually with stuff that's coming up. I have definitely had a new lease of creative energy in the last year. I am writing a book. Many of you know that I've been off and on writing a book for a while, but I have been more on it than I have previously, and it's coming together. I mean, it's mostly written now. I'm just kind of making some adjustments to the last 4 chapters. So that's coming out, or well, that's being done, and I hope it'll come out early next year. But again, on Patreon, I will be releasing it early, so you may even get that within the next few months, or start getting excerpts from it. So that is coming. I'll give you the title. Don't tell anybody. The title that I want, I need to talk to my friend Podrick about it. Oh, Podrick's coming to Wake. Podrick Utuma, that's a good one. So Podrick has a poem. It's a beautiful poem. I forget what it's called. It hasn't been published yet, but it's going to be published later this year. And it's about Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. And there's a line in that poem where Jesus names God, gives God a name. And the name is my favourite emptiness. And I love that. My favourite emptiness. So I would like to title the book My Favourite Emptiness, and then have that poem or a quote from that poem, obviously to start the book. The other possible titles at the moment are The Hysterical God, which I quite like, and The Unknowing God. So those are the 3 working titles, but I think My Favourite Emptiness is probably better. But do tell me which you like more, and if you have any other ideas, let me know. Okay, if you don't mind, I'll tell you a little bit about the book now, because it does connect with what we're talking about, and it connects with everything I'm going to be doing in the next year. I think I said this last month, but I'm not sure. So I started my vocation by doing what I at the time called a community. Let's call it a communion, a gathering that met once a month. And I did that for a decade, just over a decade. And then I moved to America. And when I moved to America, I spent more time reflecting on that, writing about it, getting the ideas out to more people. Now, before I started that gathering, before and during, I was doing a lot of studying. I did my degree in scholastic philosophy. I did my master's in political theory and social criticism, and I did my PhD in post-structural theory. And those informed this gathering called Icon that I was creating. Then, as I say, in my 30s, I moved to America, and I spent my 30s and my 40s communicating, talking, speaking, connecting with so many of you. Most of you who are watching this, who I know and have met, I met during that time. And now I find myself potentially in the last chapter of my life, maybe not, I don't know, hopefully a long chapter, but wanting to again return to creating gatherings, creating communions, where we live these ideas out. So that is the work that I am setting myself. And the book will be part of that. And I'll come to the content in a second. The other thing is we recently created a series of videos where I kind of showed what I'm calling it Church of the Contradiction at the moment. That doesn't mean it's the last name. Again, if you have a better name, let me know. One of the reasons why I like Church of the Contradiction is it's shortened to CCON. So Icon was what I did in the first kind of decade of my life and my vocation, and in this decade or more, CCON might be what I do. So I just kind of quite like the neatness of that. So CCON, Church of the Contradiction, we created these videos, and they'll be coming out. I'm actually going to show them at Wake, hopefully either the finished product or a rough cut of these. So they're coming out next month, as I say, debuting in Wake, and then maybe a couple of months later online. And that's going to be connected with an article that I wrote for Everyday Analysis. Everyday Analysis is run by a guy called Alfie Bowen, who's going to be at Wake. And we're going to do a launch of this pamphlet at Wake. and he releases these pamphlets. I think he should call them tracts or zines, but at the moment they're called pamphlets. And they have much better theorists than me. You know, there's loads of brilliant theorists that he gets every month to write an extended article, an intervention in some sort of contemporary issue. And I was in one of these pamphlets a few months ago alongside Slavoj Žižek. And I think Julie Reich was in that as well. There was a couple of people in that one. And then this month I have my very own. It's called The Prophean Temple. And that's going to come out at the same time as these videos. It'll be debuting again at Wake. And that's going to be connected to the book. And that's going to be connected to the type of groups that I want to run here in Belfast or in LA if I can get back there. The article has 3 sections. The sections are nothing lives, nothing binds, and nothing saves. And that really kind of gets to the heart of something I'm trying to do with Icon and with Seacon. Whenever I say that nothing lives, what I mean is there's a type of lack that echoes through us and echoes through everything. It lives within us. Death lives. When I say nothing binds, what I mean by that is we are not unified by our shared identities, but more fundamentally we are joined together by this lack that marks us all. Despite your different identities, there is this fact that you are not what you identify with. Jean-Paul Sartre actually wrote beautifully about this in his book Being and Nothingness. And, you know, Sartre sometimes gets a hard time, but it's a great work and with great insights. And in that book, he famously writes about a waiter, a Parisian waiter, who is so caught up in the theatrics of being a Parisian waiter that Sartre looks at him and says, he thinks he's a waiter. And he calls this bad faith, because he says to be human is to both have an identity and have lots of identities, but also to have a surplus to that identity, to never be fully reducible to your identity. Hysteria is the name for this in psychoanalysis. And Freud famously said, or well, maybe not famously, but as a throwaway line, he once said, there's a little bit of an hysteric in all of us. And that's key, because as psychoanalysis developed, Lacan really showed how this was not just a throwaway line, but actually is central, that we're all hysterical. And what that means is that we're all divided, right? What does the hysteric feel? Well, the hysteric is the one who feels imposter syndrome. They feel that they have multiple identities and they don't identify fully with their identities. They feel that they have to be, say, a mother and a lover and a daughter or a son or whatever it is. They experience these multiple identities and feel sometimes oppressed by those identities and feel like they want to be freed from those identities. So to kind of embrace hysteria in a way is to somehow begin to enjoy what is otherwise oppressive. And this is one of the interesting things about the film Barbie. Whether you liked it or not, one of the interesting things about it that I find interesting, and Todd McGowan and Ryan Engley talk about this on their podcast Why Theory, but is that one of the things that frees the Barbie dolls is that they begin to directly embrace their hysterical dimension, their self-division. They start to realize that they have all of these multiple identities that don't fit neatly together, and they're trying to hold it all together, trying to be one thing, when really they are multiple things. And it's this insight near the end of the film, I can't quite remember how it all pans out, but at near the end of the film, the protagonists are kind of helping the other Barbie dolls wake up by kind of confronting them with this short-circuiting them with by unrepressing their multiple identities and kind of experiencing that kind of impossibility. In some ways, analysis is about hystericizing the subject. So the subject in analysis begins to ask questions about themselves. Why do I love this? Why do I desire this? Why am I turned on by this, right? Why am I scared of this? And you begin to ask all of these questions of yourself, and you develop a curiosity with your own unconscious and a curiosity with yourself. And that curiosity with yourself is itself transformative. And that's why in that scene from Barbie, you kind of have, in a way, a little cinematic expression of what analysis does, especially for a neurotic. Why was I saying that? Oh, well, that's why, by the way, I'm thinking of calling the book The Hysterical God, because the idea is that the absolute, that all of reality is hysterical, which means all of reality is divided. And so, in a way, to make hysteria non-pathological, one has to, in a sense, embrace the hysteria that's within everything. So, so nothing binds. That's right. So nothing lives, nothing binds. So we're all hysterics, right? So we all have imposter syndrome. None of us is a waiter, even if we're a waiter. You are a waiter, so your identities have some importance and some, deep importance with us. I'm Irish. My history and what it meant growing up here means something. Even what I was doing as a kid, I can't show you it because I can't turn the camera around, but yesterday I remembered a games console I used to have called the Vectrex. Does anybody ever have a Vectrex? It was a games console that only was around for 2 years, from 1982 to 1984, I think. And it kind of got crushed by new technology, but it was great. Well, I didn't own it. My brother owned it, and he never let me play it. But when he was out, he's 8 years older than me, he was out, I would sneak into his room and I would play it. And I've got a poster up of my favourite game with the Vectrex, which is Fortress of Narzod. Love that game, Fortress of Narzod. So, these are things I identify with and that are important about my history, and, they mean something. But more fundamentally, I'm not unified with you because you had a Vectrex. I couldn't remember the name. I kept calling it Vortex, and then I worked out Vectrex because it used vector graphics. Right. So not unified with you because I liked a Vectrex or I liked computer games when I was a kid. Those are important things, part of my history. But what unifies me with you is that I'm a lacking subject. I'm a desiring subject like you. And so when I say nothing binds, I mean that the social bond of a communion is a bond in which we acknowledge that we do not fully identify with our identities, that we're all outsiders. And we basically become a collective of outsiders. And that's very connected to this image of Christ. When Christ was crucified, what this meant was not just a physical death. It meant that you were no longer a citizen, so you were an outsider politically. It meant you were cursed of God, so you were an outsider religiously. And it meant that you had no kind of cultural value. You were crucified outside the city with no possessions, naked. You were a cultural outsider. So politically, religiously, and culturally, you were a nobody and a nothing. You were the trash of the world. And so when Paul talks about the Christian as the trash of the world, you can think of that as identifying with the one who lost all identity. So a communion, which is as a sacrament, it is a meal around the death of God, the remembrance of this loss, this lack that is within God itself. So in a communion, there is this recognition of this nothingness, and we're bound together in that. There's a social bond. That's important because in community, you have a bond that is connected to shared values, shared beliefs, shared experiences, shared enemies. So I can create a community around people who like the Vectrex. It would be a small community. Not many people had it. Or a gaming community, arcade games, vintage games. You can create communities around shared experiences and values and enjoyments and hobbies. But a communion is a group gathered together around a shared loss. I think of AA as an example of this, because in AA, people are gathered together around a loss, a shared trauma that's connected to alcohol. And not really so much alcohol, but what lies beneath it. Alcohol is the solution to a problem, and it's a solution to a problem that many people are drawn towards, sometimes for physical reasons. I recently was talking to a friend who sometimes drinks a little much, and they were saying that the difference is when they drink, they feel energized, it does something for them. When I have a drink, and actually I'm not drinking anymore, I lost the taste for it about a year ago, but when I was drinking, it didn't do that for me. It was nice, I like to have a drink socially, but I didn't get this buzz, it didn't do something for me. So potentially you might already have a propensity to alcohol giving you something. And then if something in your life is not working, is not good, there's some trauma, then this can be the solution to that, the way to numb the pain. And in AA, they often talk about hitting rock bottom, which in psychoanalytic terms means the symptom no longer works. So what we have is we have symptoms, things that we do that bind us, that prevent us from suffering this pain that's within us. But those symptoms generally stop working eventually, right? And then when they stop working, that's when we seek help. So for someone in AA, the alcohol was working for a while, might have been working for 10 years. And from some people who I know who go to AA, they say that, in AA you tell stories, you tell funny stories about, whenever you were an alcoholic, and then you tell the traumatic stories of when it started to fall apart. And then you tell the story of what it's been like afterwards. And the funny stories at the beginning are the stories really of when it worked, right? It did work. It wasn't that it never worked, it did work. And for maybe a number of years, it was great, it was fun. But then there's the story of when it stopped working. It didn't work anymore. Gradually maybe, or all of a sudden. And then hitting rock bottom and discovering AA. So what you have in AA, again speaking from the outside, I've never been to an AA meeting, but so if I'm getting this wrong, I apologize. But I do know from people who are friends who go to AA that you get people from all walks of life that would never kind of really be found in the same room together. They're not joined together by particular identities. They're joined together by this shared trauma, and it's around alcohol. So the communion I would say that's a regional communion. And what I'm trying to do is create these gatherings that hit the universal negation. That's what Church of the Contradiction is about. It's what parotheology has always been aiming towards. It's what I call transformance art is attempting to do. So nothing binds. I really do believe that we can create healthy communions. That doesn't mean happier places. It doesn't mean places where people aren't struggling and there's not fights and there's not kind of various issues and problems and irresolvable conflicts. No, that's part of life, right? It's not a promise of happiness or wholeness or completeness, but it's a place where for an hour or two you can rob this lack of its sting. You can kind of see something, see nothing. You can make space for this radical unknowing, this wound at the heart of everything, in the heart of you, the heart of the people around you, the heart of reality itself. And having a space, what I call a desert in the oasis, just once a week, where you have that, I believe will I almost don't want to say will have positive effect. I do believe that. But I think it's true. I think it's a truth that you experience and encounter a deep truth. But I also think that truth will set you free. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. So, That's nothing binds. And I guess that brings us to the third, which is nothing saves. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. This lack, this negation, when you try to avoid it, you end up scapegoating, putting this violence onto other people. It becomes damnation, it becomes hell. It's a poltergeist that will destroy you and or the people around you. But if you're able to make space for this nothing, it is salvatory, it is curative. And one way to think about that is, it is in relation to scapegoating, that if you think that you can be whole and complete, then, and as a desiring creature, as a creature of drive, if you've been following my work for a while, you will know these terms. But they're terms that are in the article that I'll be releasing next month, because I think I did a talk on this a few months ago, the difference between demand, desire and drive. I definitely did a Fundamentalists episode with Elliot on that relatively recently, but as creatures of desire and creatures of drive, there is a sense in which we'll always have discontent. We'll always feel like things aren't quite working out. Even when things are great, it won't take long before we're wanting to do something else. We're wanting to continue to move forward and find new experiences. And there's something about a certain discontent that is inherent to being human. And if we could get rid of it, it would be an absolute disaster. This is the part of life that is good. In the book Capitalism and Desire by Todd McGowan, I really recommend that book. It's a very, very good book. He argues that one of the things that makes our contemporary economic system so powerful is that commodities give us something. So Marx very famously in Capital, he said a commodity, right? We all just look at commodities, which is anything, this microphone, a coffee cup, a camera, whatever, right? We look at commodities and we all know they're not magical. We all know there's nothing special about them. Marx said that when we take a closer look at commodities, they're filled with, he says, all sorts of metaphysical subtleties and theological niceties. And what he means by that is, we know that a commodity is not magical, but we treat it as if it is. We treat it as if it has some sort of incredible, special metaphysical property, and he calls this commodity fetishism. So what is commodity fetishism? It's kind of a term, this talk is not about that explicitly, there's lots of good stuff about it, but to say one thing about commodity fetishism, it's this idea that we treat commodities as a fetish object. A fetish being kind of like a magical object, that just like if someone dies, and I know someone who, their dog died recently, and the dog, while the dog was alive, the dog was able to help them emotionally cope with some very difficult times in their life. When the dog died, they suddenly felt not just the loss of the dog, they felt the affect, the emotional impact of some of the other things that had happened in their life. So the dog was just a dog, a dog they loved, but it was also a type of fetish object, i.e., while the dog was alive, they didn't feel the affect, they didn't feel the full emotional impact of painful things that happened in their life. Just like another couple that I know from many, many years ago. There was a friend of mine who tragically died called Peter King, and he died in a climbing accident. And his parents, now this is when we were in our 20s, and his parents, they kept his room, as many people do. They kept his room the way it was when he died. And eventually, they took apart the room. I don't know how long it was, let's say a year passed. And when they did that, there was another wave of emotional trauma. In a way, the room, being kept as it was a way to protect against the tsunami of the pain. Now, they went through waves of suffering, but we can't cope with it. We can't cope with the pain of existence when things like that happen, when someone loses a child. That is not something you survive it's not something you survive, right? Even if you live, it's some part of you dies. And one has to live with that death and find a way to live with it, and maybe find a way for that death to do something in the world. So I know people who have maybe written books in the aftermath of the loss of a child, or they've gone into some work that really benefits other people, and they still carry the death. There's no getting over the hell, but somehow they have also, something has been created that can give life to other people, but they still carry that death. But none of us could live without fetish objects, without maybe these objects, these ways of protecting ourselves from the suffering. And I want to come back to that hopefully near the end of this talk. We're in this talk, by the way. I don't think I ever said officially when we started, because it just kind of flowed in. Oh yes, the fetish object. Oh yes, so the commodity. We know it's not magical, but weirdly we treat it as if it is. And what I mean by that is, if you're young, you might not know this, and maybe some of us still don't, but most of us know that, having the new car or the next generation of smartphone will not really make us that happy. We'll get it, and sometimes within a few hours, all of the potential anticipated enjoyment is gone, right? We kind of all know that. And some of us might even be tempted with the kind of idea that we need to kind of give up our desire a little bit, not let desire rule us so much, to kind of somehow not try to fulfill our desire, but let it go. The problem is we don't do that. So we kind of know it, and yet we still are led by the nose, by the commodity. That's commodity fetishism, is we know the object's not magical, but we treat it as if it is. And how could we begin to understand how that works? Well, we need to reject the common wisdom that commodities don't give us satisfaction, right? So right, if advertisers say this commodity, this car will give you satisfaction, then the wisdom, right, the spiritual wisdom is, no, it won't. It won't give you satisfaction. But the negation of negation is the idea that, well, the commodity gives you something. It does give you something very substantial. It gives you the satisfaction of dissatisfaction, right? With the commodity promises satisfaction, but it gives you dissatisfaction. And it's actually that leads us by the nose. Commodities, by their very failure to give us what we want, is what keeps us attached to them, because that's what we want. It's failure and obstacle that make life energetic, that give it its vibrancy, and that's what drive is. Drive is our attachment, our libidinal attachment to failure, prohibition, lack itself. So demand, I'll just cover this very briefly, but demand, which you see in infants, is you want something and you get it. You want food and you get food. That's demand, and you're satisfied by getting the object. Desire is where you want the lost object, and in very simple terms, you kind of want to get back to this imagined unity with the mother, other, right? This womb-like oceanic experience of oneness. And so everything you get in the world is an attempt to kind of get back to that, or a substitute enjoyment. You can't get back to the oceanic oneness, but other objects look like they might help, right? So if demand is about the object, then desire is about the eternal search for the lost object. And there's that movie, what's it called? About the lost city of I forget. There's a movie, where they're looking for this lost city in the Amazon or whatever. It's kind of like that. You're looking for the lost object that doesn't really exist. well then demand is the attachment and the satisfaction of loss itself. So if demand is satisfied by an object, desire is satisfied by always feeling to get the lost object, and drive is the satisfaction from loss itself. And commodities kind of give us that. Right? What is the way out of that? I wasn't going to go into this. I think I talked about that last week, so we'll move on. But I guess, in a nutshell, it's how do we directly enjoy the lack? How do we enjoy what we don't have? How do we can never directly do that, but how do we indirectly experience this, kind of have a semi-permeable membrane with this nothingness? And again, that's what CCon is about. So nothing saves, in the sense of, if you don't see that, if you don't see that you're actually connected to and desirous of lack itself, right? That actually you're libidinally invested to the loss. Like, think of it as terms of a gambler who's addicted to gambling, where they're not addicted to the wins, they're actually addicted to the loss itself. That's drive, right? You're addicted to the loss itself. This causes deep suffering and deep destruction. And you're always trying to find a way to overcome it. You're always blaming other people because you can't overcome it. It creates all sorts of problems. But when you're able to, in the space of communion, become sensitive to that dimension of reality, what's called the real, you will find that you enter into a different mode of being, a different way of being in the world, a different way of comporting yourself to reality. So that's what I mean by nothing saves. Nothing lives, nothing binds, and nothing saves. Okay, I want to say one more thing in terms of the practice of communion. I want to contrast it with conservative confessional churches and progressive confessional churches. So just to say one thing about conservative churches, and I talked about this many years ago. I'm coming back to a theme that, if you go back 5 or 6 years, you'll have heard me talk about this, but it's going to be hard to find that stuff now. It is out there somewhere. But one of the things you find in conservative churches is there is an emphasis on belief. Right? So what is belief within a conservative setting? Belief's an interesting thing. I want to kind of talk about two different forms of belief here. One that's very associated with conservative churches, and one that's very associated with progressive churches. In conservative churches, belief is a type of affirmation that binds your anxiety, that gives you a sense of mastery, it gives you a sense of understanding of the world. But the key is, you don't believe it, right? And I'll make a few distinctions here, but in terms of a neurotic form of belief, a neurotic form of belief is you believe, but there is doubt and unknowing. Now, you may repress the doubt and the unknowing, but it's there. So, for example, somebody who's obsessed with apologetics, and they have all of these books on apologetics, that is not evidence that they are very secure in their beliefs. That is evidence of what's called reaction formation. And reaction formation is the defense that someone has against something. So, and it's the opposite. The defense is the opposite affect arises. So someone with loads of books on apologetics, often you will find that deep down they're deeply full of doubt and unknowing and insecurity. And the very fact that they have a library of apologetics and they're always watching apologetics is not evidence that this person is really secure, but actually evidence that this person is riven with doubt. But it's repressed, and the repression always returns. So Freud talked about the return of the repressed, and what the return of the repressed means is that when you repress something, it always immediately returns. It's not it returns in 5 years' time or whatever. The repression always returns. And the return of repression in this example is in the library of apologetics books. There is the truth. The truth isn't in what the person thinks or what the person says. The truth is in the bookshelves, right? That's why, again, in analysis, you pay attention to the tapping of the finger, or the way the person is looking away at a certain point. Is the truth is often not in the subject's experience; it's in something objective, something that they don't feel. So somebody can be depressed and not even know it. Søren Kierkegaard was very good on this, where like you can be depressed, be in despair, and not even know that you're in despair. He called it the despair of not knowing you're in despair. The depression isn't in your subjectivity. It's in the fact that you don't clean your house, that you're sleeping on a mattress, that you don't sleep on a mattress, that you always fall asleep on the sofa, right? That you're watching late night TV and wasting your time, right? The depression isn't subjectively felt. The depression is in the way that you're living. This, by the way, is when I said earlier that you need someone else sometimes to see yourself, is weirdly, that becomes obvious once you see it. But you can live like that for a year and not see it. And it's only when you see yourself through another's eyes that you're suddenly like, oh my goodness, I've been depressed for the last year. I've been depressed for the last 5 years. I didn't even know it, right? And then it becomes so obvious, you can't unsee it. Right? And again, it's just what Spark attempts to do, help you see something, not something that's hard to see, ironically help you to see something that's easy to see, but almost so close to you that you can't see it. Right? And actually there then the first job is to subjectivize the depression, to take it from being an object of sorts into language, into subjectivity, and then by digesting it with words, robbing it of its power, robbing it of its sting. So within conservative churches, often belief is not what you really believe. It holds you together. It protects you from the anxiety of existence. It gives you a sense of mastery of the world, and you don't even realize that you are full of doubts. Now, I'll give one example of this. When I used to run the Omega course, which was a group, it was playfully based off the Alpha course, which was 12-week course to get you into Christianity. So the Omega course is 12 weeks to exit it, right? But it was the same as the Alpha course. The only difference was the Alpha course would have a subject like Jesus, and ultimately you'd have a discussion, and then they would give you the inverted commas right answer. In the Omega course, we would do the same subjects, but we would look at it from 3 different perspectives. Generally a conservative perspective, a good conservative perspective. So if we looked at something like the resurrection of Jesus, we'd look at a good conservative position, someone like maybe N.T. Wright. We would look at a good kind of liberal position, right? Like maybe Bart Ehrman or something like that. And then we would look at a good kind of external view on that coming from outside of the tradition of theology, right? So we'd look at those, and then we'd have a discussion, and we would just talk about what we think and where we're at. And I remember there was a woman there who I knew very well. I say knew, she's still alive, I think. I haven't seen her for decades, but she was an elder in church, an evangelical church. And at one point they were talking about the resurrection, and one person was saying, well, I don't believe in a literal resurrection, but I find it very powerful as a metaphor. And then somebody else said, well, I actually do believe that something actually happened, right? I don't know exactly what, but I think something happened that really transformed how these early Christians saw the world. And then someone else was like, you know what, I've never really thought about it before, Now, this woman, she had said, I don't believe in it. She said, I used to believe in it. I don't really believe in it anymore. But she seemed visibly upset when she was talking. And I asked her afterwards, what's wrong? You seemed like that was difficult for you to say. And she said, well, yeah, because, I'm an elder in the church. I'm on the leadership team, and I work for this. There's a little charity that they have, a coffee shop. So I do all this work for the church. I said, if I said that publicly, if I said that to the leader, I said, I wouldn't be kicked out of the church at all. They're a lovely, lovely church. But I probably wouldn't be able to be an elder, and maybe not even on the worship team. They might let me do the charity, something unimportant, in inverted commas like that, but not important like the worship. And so I asked her, I said, oh, well, do you think the other leaders, you know them, right? Do you think the other leaders also have their doubts, and some of them might not believe anymore, or have their questions? And it was funny, she immediately said, oh yeah, I'm sure they all have questions and have doubted, and they're all smart, thoughtful people. And so I was able to say to her, okay, so the issue is not that you're feeling this and the others aren't. The issue is none of you can say it. Right? You all have to pretend either to yourselves or pretend to the others or pretend to the church so that it keeps running. Now, Slavoj Žižek once called this the subject supposed not to know. Right? This is a play on the idea of the subject supposed to know. The subject supposed to know, so I've got very itchy nose. The subject supposed to know is an analysis where the analysand assumes that the analyst sees something very deep in their unconscious. Now, the analyst is an expert and they'll see lots of things, but it's more than that. It's like you kind of start to feel that the analyst is like a god who can kind of see inside your unconscious, when really the analyst doesn't have any privileged access to your unconscious. You have privileged access to your unconscious. The analyst is trying to create an atmosphere, feeding things back to you so that you begin to see something. But this can only happen if you believe that the subject knows. So this is called the subject supposed to know. And eventually you overcome that. Right? As part of analysis is even coming to know that the analyst is a person like you, divided like you, but subject supposed to know is the first stage. Whenever Žižek uses the term the subject supposed not to know, he's talking about God. It's almost like in an evangelical church, we have to pretend to the absolute that everything is good. So we're pretending to each other, we're pretending to the liturgy, we're pretending to God, and as long as we do that, it binds our anxiety. It gives us, as I say, this sense of mastery. It performs a function, an important function. And if you admit this, it can often be traumatic. And it's not just traumatic because you might get kicked off the eldership team. It's traumatic whether you are or you're not. It's traumatic inherently, and it can you can fall apart. And then generally what you do is you look for an alternative. I see this all the time. Ersatz gods, commodity satisfaction, psychedelic enlightenment, sexual liberation. You find something else that seems to promise the answer, right? Because it's traumatic. And so conservative belief, I would say, is like that. Now, there is what's called psychotic belief, and that's where someone is tyrannized by certainty. They do believe absolutely, right? But that's not the majority. Majority of people, and that's, we could talk about that another time, but the majority of they're actually very threatening in a conservative church. The person who really believes. You're supposed to believe and not really believe, right? The person who really believes, and some of you will have been those people. I was that person, right? That's where you so believe. Like, I used to turn my alarm clock off if I had to get up really early because God's going to wake me up. Why do I need an alarm clock? It's the kind of person who will give all of their money away because God will provide. It's the person who won't lock the church because they go, why do I have to lock the church? God will protect it, right? So what you're supposed to do is believe all those things, but not really, right? That's the way it works. So it's a real threat whenever in a conservative church there's someone who really believes, and they cause problems, and they're not allowed on the leadership team. They're patted on the head, but don't get them too high up in the church because you can't function otherwise, right? You're supposed to have repressed doubt. Now then, I'll go on to the progressives. In the progressive circles, belief is not at that level. You're able to have doubts and unknowing and not believe and ask any question you want. And not only is that tolerated, that's celebrated. That's a sign of maturity. It's, deconstructing your faith, and that's like, oh, you've graduated. You actually want that, right? So doubt and unknowing is not something that you hide as a dirty little secret, or that you hide from yourself, or that you see as a necessary evil. It is celebrated. It's something that's good. It's something that's great. However, what you often find is in the liturgy, there is an undivided God, right? And I should have said this, sorry, in the conservative, it's the belief in an undivided God, a God of complete control, got everything in hand, wholeness, completeness, and, you will you will have the same in the next life, right? In progressives, there isn't necessarily that belief at all, especially as you mature into progressivism. But the hymns and the prayers and the sermons all kind of give you that kind of substantive God. And the idea here is that belief isn't in your head subjectively. Belief is in the liturgy, right? So as long as the liturgy believes in this, your anxiety is held, you don't experience the affect of the belief that you have. So remember what I said about the friends, they lost their child, and while keeping the room the same way, they were protected from the affect of that death, right, to some extent. Or I think I used another example as well, but commodity, fetishism. And the dog that died, right, which is very common. Pets can hold so much, right? The idea there, it's like what was it, Winnicott? I think it was Winnicott, but talks about the transitional object. Transitional object is like a security blanket that a child has. The point of a security blanket is that a child can experience a very traumatic, scary world, right? A world that is massive, lots of things they don't understand, lots of desires they don't understand, lots of conversations they don't understand. And if you have heard me talk about trauma before, you'll understand that the core of trauma is not knowing what the other wants, not knowing the other's desire. And as a child, you are in a world full of unknown desires, what these adults want and desire. When you have the security blanket, you are not protected intellectually. You're protected from the affect of that unknowing. And when you take the security blanket away, you don't suddenly get new knowledge. You don't see the world in a new way. Now you experience the affect of what you already know, right? You already know you're in a world which is full of unknowing and lack of understanding, but with the security blanket you're protected from feeling that, and it's an important thing to have, and you don't just take it away overnight. But part of becoming an adult is slowly being able to let go of the security blanket and let yourself feel the affect of the trauma, right? And then you can integrate it and hopefully engage in the world in a healthy way. So in a similar way, the liturgy of progressive churches are like that security blanket, although they're not transitioning you off it. They just continue to do that. Therefore, you don't feel the anxiety. So this is just like the parent who, while the child believes in the tooth fairy, the adult gets all the enjoyment of the belief in the tooth fairy without believing in the tooth fairy. And it's when the child stops believing, and often the child pretends to believe, right? Once the child stops really believing in the tooth fairy, there might be a year or two where they pretend to believe in the tooth fairy because they see the enjoyment that it gives the parent, right? Because when they reveal that they don't believe, it's the parent who experiences the disappointment. Now, they are not, they don't lose some belief. They're disillusioned. They're disenchanted. The world becomes disenchanted, right? So it's not that an illusion goes, but an enchantment goes. So within progressive circles, you will see that is you're protected from the affect. Now, what's interesting about the crucifixion is the crucifixion is not an intellectual experience of the loss of God. We could call this, it's not an experience of intellectual atheism, but it's not an experience of an intellectual loss of God, because Christ cries out, my God, right? So Christ is in the story, believes in God. It's an existential experience of loss, or it's an existential atheism. Why have you forsaken me? It's not intellectual. It's at the level of affect. And so this brings us to radical liturgy. And what I'm trying to do with Church of the Contradiction is that in radical liturgy, in communion, the communion that I'm talking about, doubt, unknowing, complexity, self-division is woven into the liturgical structure itself. It's woven into the poetry, woven into the music, woven into the words that are spoken. And what happens is the congregation who are gathered, whether they believe in God or not, it's irrelevant. They believe unconsciously, right? They project out onto the liturgy an undivided God, and that's what they want to get back. So they project that out, but they introject a divided God. Introjection is when you pull back what is out there. So you project onto the liturgy this undivided, absolute, the wholeness, completeness, the answer. But the liturgy refuses to give you what you want. And Lacan once famously said that the analyst has to refuse the temptation to give the analysand what they want. Because the analysand just wants everything to work. They want to be fixed. They want to be whole again. They want their symptom to start functioning again. They want to bind their anxiety. They don't want to face their anxiety. They don't want to learn to live with that anxiety, right? So there's a real temptation that the analyst says everything's going to be okay and tries to be a paternal or a maternal figure, right? And that's what you get in therapy. That's what you get in various therapies, is a maternal or a paternal figure, right? But in analysis, analysis proper, you avoid being a maternal or a paternal figure. Because what you want to do is you want to help the person embrace and enjoy their anxiety, right? So the liturgy has to resist the temptation to give back some undivided absolute and instead give back a divided absolute. So you project out one thing and you introject the other. And through this experience of weekly introjection, through art and music and spoken word and poetry and paintings and all of that stuff, and you'll see some videos in a little while of what this looks like. I can't wait to share them with you. Thank you to the people who gave the money to allow these to be made. We got a small amount of money together, it was just from a couple of people, and we were able to make them. So thank you for that. You'll see maybe what this looks like. But the idea is that we have to experience this on a regular basis, not just once, but there has to be a desert in the oasis that we return to again and again and again to help us introject this experience and find a way of experiencing that truth and letting that truth set us free. Now, I think that's enough. I've put a lot into this. I actually wasn't planning to do this much, but this just connects with a lot of other seminars I've been giving over the last lot of years. It maybe sums it up, says it in different ways, but the material is out there if you're interested in going back and looking at some of my early work on the practice of parotheology. But that's what I'm trying to do here. So I appreciate you listening. I'm going to look if there's any questions in the comments section before I disappear off, and say if you want to explore this with me in person, then come out to Belfast next month and spend 5 days with me, and we'll be really digging into this with some incredible people who I trust. I don't trust that many people as I get older, but at Wake I bring the people that I trust together to explore these ideas. So give me 1 second, I'm going to grab my computer. Okay, that's great. I see there's a few. Oh, there's lots of comments and questions. Wonderful. I wasn't sure if many people would be joining me live because I know it's weird time zones and all of that kind of stuff. Tim says nothing resonates with me. It is so rich with the double meanings. I like that. Nothing resonates with me. Oh yes, and Tim says, I identify as both a theist and an atheist. Can I share this with you, Tim, and everybody else? In Zizek's latest book called Christian Atheism, he does a very clever play, which I wish I'd thought of. He talks about atheism. What he does is he makes the first letter lowercase, italicized, and then dash, and then theism. So theism is belief in God. Atheism is belief that there is no God. And then this atheism is not, because there's different forms of atheism. If you know John Caputo's work, there's that, and Richard Carney, and there's various interesting ways of playing with these ideas. But Zizek's one is closest to my own, and it's where the A stands for objet putia. Objet putia is this nothingness that generates our desire. So atheism is this idea of the A representing this lack, and then theism, A/theism. So I really like it. I'm going to do some stuff on that in the future. Okay, so here's a few questions and see what I can do. Tim says, would Julie Reich say that accepting one's hysterical identity makes things worse rather than better? Does Barbie and her friends' lives get better, or are they introduced to death? Yeah, that's very good. And funnily enough, Julie Reich is going to be at Wake. Unfortunately, she's not going to be there live. She's going to be there dialed in because she's in Prague, so she couldn't make it this time, but she's going to be there. That's a very Julie Reich kind of way of saying it. If anybody doesn't know who Julie is, one, check out her YouTube. Also check out, I've had a couple of conversations with her. You can find them on my YouTube as well. So if you don't know who she is, I won't say too much. You go and find her. She wrote a really excellent book called Negative Psychoanalysis. And in a way, what I always sum up Julie's work by saying that she does not want an economic approach to therapy where you get something in return. For her, this nothingness, this death is always there. It's always at work, and facing it doesn't necessarily do anything good. And in fact, as Tim, you're saying, it might even be worse, right? If you can go through life without thinking about it, hey, maybe more power to you. Just some people can't, and they're usually called artists, or the depressed, or whatever. So Julie might say it kind of as almost for the worse. I think what is very difficult for anybody to escape, including Julie, is escaping from an evaluative judgment. Because even if she said, yes, it's worse to encounter your own hysteria, your own not at oneness with yourself, like that's worse. And she'll be very key in saying, and don't think you're better for it. If you experience that, don't think that you're some elite person who has seen the truth that other people haven't, because the truth is always at work. But it's very hard not to have an evaluative dimension of saying, well, that's better. And I'm just a little bit happier about saying that. And Julie is trying to find a way to not do that. But she does admit as well of even writing a book called Negative Psychoanalysis seems to, you write often out of a desire to communicate something that you think is of value. So anyway, I don't know if that's of value, but thank you, Tim. Catherine says, do you ever get concerned that the core message of paratheology will get distorted or reinterpreted into something far from what you intend, to society's detriment? How do you deal with that? Oh, what a brilliant question. What a brilliant question. Yes and no. Everyone will be misunderstood, always. And I think my early work could definitely be misunderstood because I misunderstood. Like, I think I only have come to this level of clarity in the last 10 years. Do I worry about it? Well, actually, maybe I'll say, I don't worry about it, but maybe I should. I think it's probably inevitable. Okay, this is me just thinking. I think it's a brilliant question. I would love to think about it more deeply. But my intuitive answer is it's inevitable that it will be misunderstood. And also, I hope it is. There's two types of misunderstanding. Again, Zizek is brilliant on this, where he says philosophy is pretty much brilliant misinterpretations of previous thinkers, right? So what you find is often a thinker comes along, like say Søren Kierkegaard, misinterprets Hegel, and that misinterpretation creates existentialism. So there's kind of two types of misinterpretation. There's misinterpretation that will try to fold these ideas back into something substantive, right? And that's a danger, and I have to try to be as clear as possible. I'm going to come back to that in a second, but yeah, so there's that. And then there's a good misinterpretation. There's people who will misinterpret my work and do something much better with it. So I'm excited about that type of misinterpretation rather than the former kind. The reason why I want to come back to the former kind is, what was I going to say? Yes, that's where this work gets folded back into something substantive, into something confessional. And what was I going to say about that? I can't remember. I was going to say something about that. Give me 1 second. So there's a misinterpretation. Oh yes, sorry, I was going to say this. That in some respects the most important thing that I have to offer is not the theoretical side. I think, I can do that, and I spend a lot of time doing it, and I love it. But if parotheology has anything substantive to give, it is the practice. And what I'm really trying to do is get about 100 or 200, let's say under 1,000 people, but I think a couple of hundred would be great, who really understand this and really get it, and who want to put it into practice. And then they will create these churches of the contradiction. We'll maybe call something else. That's just what I'm calling it at the moment. And then it's not about interpreting or misinterpreting for the people who go. Just like in psychoanalysis, when you go to psychoanalysis, sometimes the analyzer wants to talk about psychoanalysis, but the analyst doesn't get caught up in that, or shouldn't get caught up in that, because it's not about understanding psychoanalysis to get some value out of it. It's about kind of going through the process. So what I want to do is I want to find a couple of hundred people or more who really get this and are really passionate about it and who want to put it into practice. And then we show what it looks like. And the majority of people won't be into this work because they theoretically find it interesting. They will find the liturgy that we create powerful. They will find it curative. So we don't need that many people to understand this. We really don't. That's part of the work of the next 10 years, is to get those few hundred people. I keep making it bigger. I said 100, then 200, now I'm saying a few hundred. But I get that number of people who want to show the practice of this and create the liturgies. And as I say, then somebody will go to that liturgy and they'll experience it. And whatever they think, doesn't matter what they think about the world, that experience of projection and introjection will be transformative. And next month, as I said, I'm going to show the videos of one way that might look. Don't know if that helped. Leah, what are some basic reasons for people to gather? Does it have something to do with seeing yourself that was mentioned earlier? What are some basic reasons? I guess so. With AA, or even with analysis, what brings a person to analysis is generally the symptom no longer works. Whatever it was that was helping them and working for them is no longer working. Now, there's something about AA and about paratheology and about psychoanalysis that's the same, which is we're not knocking on doors, right? You're not trying to force someone. You're not trying to take someone's symptom away, right? A symptom, by the way, is a compromised formation that gives a substitute enjoyment. The symptom gives a type of enjoyment. If you want to shout at your boss, I think Richard Boothby uses this example somewhere, but if you want to shout at your boss, but you don't want to get fired, you might bite your nails. So at work, you're always biting your nails. And that might mean you're biting your claws. You're getting a substitute enjoyment. That's giving you some sort of enjoyment that is less aggressive. Or you're internalizing your aggression in a way that's maybe working for a time. So when the symptom stops working, then you're going to have to look for something, right? You'll often try to get the symptom to work again. You'll try to kickstart it, like trying to start a car with a dead battery. And I remember with Icon, the people who came there were people who, one example, there's a friend I'm thinking of, his marriage failed. And he was a conservative evangelical Christian. He did everything right, and his marriage failed. And that failing of the marriage was for him began, the whole belief structure that he had began to break. He began to suffer. And he knew about Icon, and he came to Icon, and Icon, instead of trying to, get him a new partner and get him set up and, get the symptom working again, Icon helped him embrace the doubt and the unknowing and the disappointment in a way that robbed it of its sting. And I can think of somebody else, it was an illness, and someone else who it was the loss of a job. So in some respects, I would say that if we can get these going, if there's 400 of us that are doing these liturgies and they're publicly known, this is why we need people like Nicole, who is part of Parotheology, people who know how to get the word out there. This is not about telling people to come to something, but saying this is here if you need it. I sometimes use the example of the A-team, where they show up whenever there's a crisis in the community. They do their work, and then the last scene is them driving off, and the community's kind of back together again, but they turn up when they're needed. We need people who are very good at helping us get the word out, so people know that these places exist, so that when the symptom is no longer working, when they start to go, I am divided, I am suffering, I am in crisis, this space might be useful. One other thing about that, Bud, is I want to make a very clear distinction. I talk about this in the YouTube talk I did with Julie Reish just last week, which is now on her YouTube channel. There's a difference between the universal lack that we all have, and that's what we're dealing with, and then the particular ways that manifests in your life. That might manifest in your life in a way that causes a particular type of intense suffering. That is where you go to analysis. Analysis is really good at looking at your individual suffering. Parotheology is where you look at the suffering that is being human. There's the traumas that happen to you, and there's the trauma that is you. And these are both interconnected, right? So they meet in the middle, they're both connected, but they're slightly different. So in terms of the liturgy of lack, it is when people start to feel, I'll use Paul Tillich for a second and go like, when you start to feel a lack of meaning, when you start to feel a general sense of guilt or a general sense of fear over death, right? The three ways in which nothing makes itself manifest: lack of life, lack of meaning, or lack of morale, lack of being, right? In guilt, you are not who you think you should be. So lack of being, lack of meaning, lack of life. When these more general senses of nothingness begin to cause you suffering, CCON is somewhere that might be able to help you rob those of their weight. Tim, don't many Christians treat crosses, the Bible, church buildings, etc. as commodity fetishes? Absolutely. And, that's my criticism of the conservative and the progressive church, is kind of what I was doing there earlier, subtly, now less subtly because you just called it out, is I think that they're fetishes. One is, in conservatism, belief is a affirmation, and in progressivism it is more often in the liturgy itself, right? High church, low church, or whatever is another way of talking about it. But both of those are forms of fetish, right? And that's what I mean by belief. If you don't say I believe 2 + 2 = 4, right? Say 2 + 2 = 4, right? A belief is something you might think, but a belief, the way I'm looking at it, has a function. And the function of belief is to hold you together. And that's not a bad thing. We all need that. But conservative and progressives are just two different ways in which the belief holds you together. And in a radical liturgy of lack, it doesn't immediately rip the security blanket away. No, you start with the projection. You allow the projection to happen. You start with the idea of the subject supposed to know, the undivided God, and gradually through the liturgy, over each individual liturgy, but also over the course of maybe a year, 2 years, 3 years, you gradually introject the divided God and overcome the fetish. That's the work. Oh, there's lots of questions. I'm going to keep going, so you can come back and watch this. I'll upload it. I'll maybe chop it and upload it, so you don't have to stay here for the whole thing. But I would like to go through. I really appreciate the questions, and I want to give everybody a chance to ask. So the next one. Night of the World. Julie Reish's view of life as destructive plasticity comes to mind, a flowing series of deaths which reshape us. That's beautifully said. She's also a beautiful writer. That sounds very Julie Reish. So yeah, check it out. Lost City of Z. That's what I was thinking on, based on a true story. The writer who wrote it also wrote Killers of the Flower Moon. Oh yeah, I haven't watched that yet. Thank you for that. Let's see. A lot of this is just comments and thoughts. Here we go. Question. How do you feel about Elaine Pagels or Pagels? Oh, the fact that I can't pronounce her name is probably going to already betray my answer, which is I don't know who this is. Gospel of Thomas views. She sounds quite New Age on the surface. Children of the Light talk. Yet textually, it seems radical, revolutionary, atheistic reading. Okay, well, I'll check it out actually, because I don't know who that is, but that's really interesting. So thank you. I like that. Question from Q Church, York. Does the idea of leaders not really wanting people to genuinely believe also cross over to political leaders and their policies? This is very good. Does the idea of leaders not really wanting people to genuinely believe also cross over to political leaders and their policies? Okay, so if I hear you correctly, you're using that example I talked about where you're not really supposed to believe. Yeah. So you kind of all affirm it, but you don't. And you say, yes, what is the political version? It's absolutely. I mean, we can all probably know this firsthand, but in Los Angeles, where I got a lot of good examples from my work, what people say publicly and really believe publicly, and then what they say privately in like WhatsApp groups and in jokes is so paradigmatically different and yet interconnected that you have to, and this is actually a version of perversion, where in perversion, think about like a college, a very elite college, where everybody is really good and it's all about being upright and being a good citizen and learning how to be a leader. But then you have some secret society where you have to do hazing rituals and do kind of like sexual acts and kind of all of this kind of crazy stuff, and they seem so opposed, but actually they're interconnected. That's the place where you release all of this dark libidinal energy so that you could kind of pretend that everything's perfect and good. They're interconnected, and if you're not part of this secret society, you're never likely going to be the prime minister, right? You have to kind of be part of that place. In a similar way with political groups, often there is what I call purity culture, and there's a purity culture and what's in and what's out, what's good and what's bad, but there's all these places where that kind of purity, there's an impurity and a dirt, and they're not integrated. They're kind of held so far apart. So yes, interestingly, it doesn't mean that the opposite is always good, because there is that's very much within, say, kind of some leftist groups. You see that who embrace identity politics, but on the right you see something slightly different, which is sometimes an enjoyment of kind of transgression, right? So they're different modes of enjoyment, and they both have their issues. So anyway, but anyway, I absolutely think that what I'm saying here has connections in terms of our understanding of politics, and I definitely do want to do more talks about that. I think it's really, really key. First Reformed is a cool movie. I don't know if I haven't seen that movie, or if I know, but I know I've heard it's very, very good. Also, someone's asking, I can't say your name, Buyakasha. Have you read anything by Schopenhauer? Absolutely, love Schopenhauer. His chapter on religion may interest you. He talks about how liturgies often contain some contradiction to get a point across. Ooh, I have to read that actually, or maybe read that for the first time. I do like Schopenhauer, but thank you again for the recommendation. I love recommendations, by the way. Hopefully you do too. These are things that we can go off and watch or read. I might read that tonight. And lastly, oh yes, Formless Recording says we did a movie discussion on First Reformed. So on my Patreon, there was a discussion on First Reformed. I wasn't at that one. Okay, listen, everybody, thank you so much for being part of this. I actually was planning to do a very short talk today, really. I was going to go, just something small. And I think I've been talking for an hour and a half. So thank you if you made it this far. Thank you for your support if you're on my Patreon. Hopefully some of you I'll meet in June at Wake or in October at one of my retreats. Other than that, next week is Coffee and Concepts, where we'll take one of these ideas and in a Zoom room we'll discuss them and ask for patrons. So, all right, thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.